We now proceed to the motion on the police grant report for England and Wales. Call the Minister to move the motion. Chris Philp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the police grant report England and Wales 2024 to 2025, laid before Parliament on January the 31st this year, be approved. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me start by saying that police officers and PCSOs, special constables and police staff up and down the country do great work every single day of the week, keeping us and our constituents safe, very often putting themselves in the line of danger to protect the public. And I'm sure members across the House will want to pay tribute to those officers and staff and thank them for the work that they do. The vast majority of officers, of course, are decent, hard-working and brave, and we owe them a great deal. Madam Deputy Speaker, the police look after and support us. It's important that we support and look after them in return. And the funding settlement that we present to Parliament today does that. We are increasing the funding available for policing by £843 million compared to last year. Last year's funding had already been increased by £330 million, accounting for the police pay settlement effective from September the 1st. So next year's envelope in total will be £18.4 billion. Now, within that, we are prioritising the front line. We're getting more money than ever before into the hands of police and crime commissioners who spend money on frontline policing. So police and crime commissioners will be receiving, assuming they use their precept flexibility, which I think they will, an extra £922 million next year, which is a cash increase of 6% compared to the previous year. I will give way.
I'm very grateful to the Peace Minister for giving way, and I'd like to thank him for those increases which he's mentioned. I'd like to thank him for his help on Section 59, dealing with illegal motorcycles in my area. The issue with Bedfordshire Police is that we survive on a series of top-up grants because the national funding formula is not very fair to us. And does the Minister foresee a time when we can get rid of those and have our core funding baked into our core funding so we don't rely on these special grants?
And, well, I thank the honourable member for his intervention. He campaigns tirelessly for Bedfordshire policing and to combat the scourge of antisocial motorcycle use. And I believe we're going to be organising a meeting very shortly to discuss that particular issue. He's right to say that Bedfordshire does receive special grant support in order to fund its activity, particularly in relation to gang violence in certain urban parts of the county. But he is right, we do need to change the underlying funding formula to update it. It's, I think, over 10 years out of date. It needs to better reflect population changes, changes in crime, better reflect issues of sparsity and rurality, and that is something which the Home Office is actively working on. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I saw a few people rising, so I'm going to give way to my honourable friend there and then to both members the other side of the House.
On that very point, I'm grateful to my honourable friend giving way and for the very good meeting you had with Lincolnshire MPs yesterday. He's an outstanding Minister. He will appreciate that counties like Lincolnshire, taking account of Bedfordshire's extra money, the worst funded authority in the country with the lowest staffing level, face particular challenges because of its sparsity. Delivering any public service, including policing, over a sparsely populated area is a challenge. Would he take a close look at what extra he can do in anticipation of the much needed change of the funding formula which is advocated today?
Thank you. Well, my right honourable friend, as he said, met with me yesterday evening and made a very powerful case for Lincolnshire Police. He made a powerful case for the need to update the funding formula, as we've just discussed, but he did also make the case for Lincolnshire in the coming financial year, and that is something which I undertook to go away and look at. As he said, issues of sparsity and rurality affecting Lincolnshire, some other counties as well, do need to be properly accounted for, and the Right Honourable Member for South Holland and the Deepings made an extremely powerful and compelling case in our meeting yesterday. Now I'll give way to the honourable gentleman there and then the other honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful to the Minister, and the picture he paints with regards to funding isn't entirely accurate. In particular, in West Yorkshire, we saw funding directly from ministers fall by 25 million between 15-16 and 19-20. And what's more is the cumulative total of the government funding was cut from West Yorkshire Police amounts to more than 100 million accrued between 15-16 and now. So once the figures the Minister announces are looked at with regards to the cumulative amount, that surely changes things, and it's not as rosy as the picture the Minister paints.
Well, in relation to longer-term funding trends, cash funding for police in total in 2010-11 was, from memory, about 13.1 billion. As I've set out, it's now 18.4 billion, so it's 5.3 billion pounds higher in cash terms, which has essentially kept pace with inflation, although crime, of course, is lower. He mentions West Yorkshire in particular. The government grant, the central government grant for West Yorkshire in the current financial year, 23-24, with the extra money for the pay that I mentioned, was 415 million. Next year, the government grant will go up for West Yorkshire by about 31 million pounds. That's well more than inflation. It'll go from 415 million up to 446 million. Adding in the police precept, which may go up a little bit as well, West Yorkshire's funding next year will be 7.1% higher. Now, I did make the point that over policing as a whole, frontline policing will be up by 6% next year.
About the precept.
In just a moment. Overall, police funding will be up for frontline forces by 6% next year compared to this. Of course, inflation is currently only 4% and forecast to fall further. Now, I think I promised to give way there first and then to my colleague from the New Forest.
For giving way, further to the intervention of my honourable friend, isn't it the reality that the contribution of the police precept to the overall cost of policing has increased substantially? So in the case of David Powys, the precept was 37% of the total funding in 2010-11. This year's 54.4%. So the burden is being pushed onto local taxpayers via the precept.
Well, overall, across England and Wales, around about 2/3 of the total funding comes from central government. It does vary by police force, as he says. But in relation to David Powys in particular, the government grant is going up next year by 6 million, which is nearly 10%, I would say, whereas the precept component is only going to go up by about 3 million. So the government grant to David Powys will go up by double the amount of the precept increase. And I say again, frontline police forces next year will have a funding increase of 6% at a time when inflation is only 4% and falling.
Donna Jones, the Hampshire Police and Crime Commissioner, launched a consultation. And certainly my view is that if constituents attach great importance to policing, and certainly my correspondence tells me that they do, then they will be prepared to pay for it.
Well, the honourable gentleman is quite right. Of course, all policing, whether it's funded from central government or via the precept, it is ultimately paid for by taxpayers. In the most recent spending review a few years ago, the precept limit was set actually at £10. That is to say, English forces could only put up the precept by £10. We have given more flexibility. This current year, it was £15. This next year, it will be £13. So there is flexibility for PCCs to decide to increase the precept by a bit more if they choose to, and that is their democratic right.
Grateful for the Minister giving way on the issue of police and crime commissioners. I don't know if he's aware of the appalling comments made by the Cheshire and Police Crime Commissioner about schoolgirls wearing very short skirts. Now, this raises huge questions about victims having confidence in the justice system in Cheshire. So will he take the opportunity to distance himself from those comments and join with us in calling on him to resign?
Well, I'm afraid I haven't seen those comments, so I don't think it would be right for me to remark on comments that I haven't seen. But I will say that the government is completely committed to combating violence against women and girls, to increase rape prosecutions and prosecutions for serious sexual assault. My honourable friend, the Safeguarding Minister, the Member for Newbury, and I had a meeting with policing leaders on that very topic just in the last few days, and it is something we are completely committed to doing. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, In addition to this substantial funding increase, £922 million, nearly £1 billion for frontline policing, 6%, an above inflation increase being announced today. We have, of course, increased total police expenditure by about £2.7 billion since 2019, which has funded the Police Uplift programme. And I think it's worth reiterating today that last year, in fact in March of last year, we hit our target. In fact, we exceeded our target, delivering 149,566 officers in March of last year, about 3,500 more than we have ever seen at any time in the history of policing in England and Wales. And so that is an important commitment, and our intention is to maintain those officer numbers going forward. And we have constructed the Police Uplift ring fence and the financial arrangements for this coming financial year to enable police forces around the country to maintain those higher officer numbers. Now, of course, officer numbers... Of course I'll give away.
Thank you very much indeed. I appreciate you giving way. Thank you very much. I wonder, first of all, Leicestershire Police do an excellent job. As you said earlier on, police forces across the country do some great work. Leicestershire Police in particular, particularly in Loughborough with county lines and dealing with those, which is superb. And those new officers, many of those new officers are based in Loughborough and doing an excellent job. The increase in the precept is also excellent and very, very welcome indeed in Leicestershire. But could we do more? So not just necessarily increasing the value of the precept, but also ensuring that what the police are asked to do is more of an efficient nature, such as redaction, so that they don't have to redact evidence of 25% of cases that go to the CPS and then are not taken further forward.
Well, I think my honourable friend, the member for Loughborough, raises an important point. This is not just about more resources, it's about making sure that the police can operate efficiently. So one of the things we're doing is rolling out the initiative that started in Humberside, Right Care, Right Person, to make sure that where a mental health case is purely medical and there's no threat to public safety and there's no criminality, that is handled medically by the health service. Implementing that across the country will save about 1 million hours a year of police time. There are other administrative changes we can make, and in fact the redaction issue is one of them. I discussed that with the new Director of Public Prosecutions, Stephen Parkinson, earlier this week, and I'll be discussing it with him again in March. If we can make changes to the rules around redaction, it will save very many hours of police time, but there are also technology solutions that will help not just in those 25% of cases the CPS decide not to charge, but also the 75% of cases the CPS do charge. And the automated redaction tools, they're AI-driven, will save many, many tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of hours of police time. And I'm encouraging police forces up and down the country to adopt that technology to save a huge amount of time. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was just saying before the intervention that record police officer numbers and record funding levels are all well and good, but what the public want are results. And as the Office for National Statistics have told us, let me just make this point, then I will give way. As the Office for National Statistics have told us, the only reliable source of long-term trend data for high-volume crimes is the Crime Survey of England and Wales, which shows that overall crime, excluding fraud and computer misuse, which only came into the figures recently, went down from 9.5 million offences in the last year of the last Labour government, down to 4.3 million in the last year, a 55% reduction. Violence, 1.8 million offences under the last Labour government, down to just 900,000, a 51% reduction. Theft, down from about 5 million offences to 2.7, a 46% reduction. Robbery, down 74%. Theft from the person, down 40%. Domestic burglary, down 56%. Vehicle-related theft, down 39%. Criminal damage, down 72%. I think even bicycle theft, Madam Deputy Speaker, has gone down under this government. The plan is working. Let's not go back to square one. And when it comes to the most serious crime of all, homicide, in the last year of the last Labour government, there were 620 homicides. We've managed to get that down to 591. Everyone a tragedy. Everyone is one too many. But I'm sure all of us can welcome that reduction in homicide, which I'm sure the honourable member over there is about to join me in doing.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I offer my support to our local police and say what a wonderful service they provide our community. And I would like to start by saying I was curious when he started talking about bureaucracy, because it appears that what the government has actually done in the last 14 years is to cut police numbers very substantially and then replace some of those police officers with new officers who need to be trained. Would he confirm the proportion of the new officers who he's referred to today who are still in training or are undergoing some form of training and support?
So just to be clear, there was a reduction in police officer numbers in the coalition years, the years immediately after 2010, owing to the appalling financial conditions that were inherited. But they haven't just been replaced, to be clear, they've been more than replaced. So the total number of officers in England and Wales we reached last year is about 3,500 higher than it was in 2010. So they've been more than replaced, just for the sake of clarity and accuracy. But it is true to say that many of the officers currently employed have joined relatively recently, and that does mean there is a training and supervision job to do, which police forces are doing. But of course, with each month that passes, following the influx in the last 3 or 4 years, those officers gain experience. The retention rates are quite high. The staff survey, shows quite high satisfaction rates. So with each month that passes, the workforce does become that bit more experienced, and that will benefit our constituents, and it will make sure these crime trends, these falling crime trends, will continue to go down. Madam Deputy Speaker, we're taking action on drugs, closing over 2,000 county lines since April 2022, tackling knife crime that we discussed extensively yesterday, removing over 130,000 knives through stop and search, which is important. We do need to use stop and search with confidence, and surrender programmes, investing in violence reduction units, and we renew our commitment today to fund those violence reduction units who do prevention work. We renew our commitment to hotspot patrolling against serious violence and knife crime and antisocial behaviour. And this funding settlement includes £66 million of extra money. It'll go to every single police force in the country to run hotspot patrolling in areas where antisocial behaviour and serious violence is a problem. Where we've trialled that, I will come to it in a minute, where we've trialled that, for example, antisocial behaviour hotspot patrolling in parts of Essex, for example, and serious violence patrolling in places like Brighton, we have seen approximately 30% reductions in antisocial behaviour and in things like robbery. So we know this works, and every single police force from April of this year, just a couple of months' time, will get that funding. And I would urge members on both sides to talk to their local PCC and make sure those hotspot patrols take place in the locations, the town centres, the high streets, wherever it may be, that they feel there's a problem, so the public can see this issue being dealt with.
Thank you. I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. During those years of austerity that hit our police forces so hard, we did lose the 21,000 police officers. He has talked about the uplifting numbers since then, but actually in that same period, police stations across the UK were closed at a rate of 1 a week since 2010, which resulted in 4 in 10 police stations being closed during that period. I wonder what his plan is to see those police stations again be reopened in the hearts of our communities if we're truly going to take some of those streets back where we've seen massive problems with antisocial behaviour.
Well, of course, it's up to police and crime commissioners how to spend the money in this record funding settlement. Some police forces are being creative by, for example, co-locating with fire stations. It is also, good police and crime commissioners avoided closing police stations. So, for example, the former Conservative Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, managed to largely avoid police station closures that his predecessor, Ken Livingstone, had planned, and closures which his successor, Sadiq Khan, has, in fact, in some cases, carried out, or at least threatened to carry out. There are good police and crime commissioners who avoid station closures. In West Midlands, where there is currently a Labour police and crime commissioner, Simon Foster, he is planning to close 20 police stations. There are ways of avoiding that by better managing the budgets. There is a record funding settlement here. These are choices made locally, and they are very often avoidable. Madam Deputy Speaker, we're also providing £1 billion for national policing priorities and capabilities, including various forms of technology, new national databases, and so on. Very important that we continue to use technology to innovate. That includes investing heavily in things like robotic process automation, which saves a lot of manual work, automated redaction tools I've mentioned already, using facial recognition, both retrospective facial recognition to identify suspects who have committed an offence and whose picture has been caught by CCTV, but also live facial recognition to spot people who are wanted by police when they, for example, walk down a high street or walk through a train station. And we've been deploying that in recent weeks in my own borough, Croydon, in South London, and people have been caught wandering down the street who were wanted for rape, wanted for GBH, drug offences, people who had failed to attend court. Our local superintendent thinks that over about 10 deployments on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons in central Croydon between December and January, he thinks they're going to end up arresting about 100 people who are wanted for really serious offences or who didn't turn up to court. And those are people who would otherwise never have been arrested. So again, I would ask members just to ask your local PCC and ask your Chief Constable, what are they doing with retrospective facial recognition? What are they doing with live facial recognition? These technologies can catch dangerous criminals who would otherwise go undetected. It's a really important area. We're continuing to invest in various crime programmes. I've mentioned violence reduction units. I've mentioned hotspot patrolling. Project ADDA, dealing with drugs, continues. The Safer Streets project continues as well. We're also continuing our funding for counter-terrorism policing at around about £1 billion per year, in addition to our support for ROCUs, regional organised crime units, at around about £25 million a year. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a record police funding. It is going up by more than inflation as far as police and crime commissioners are concerned. We hit record ever police numbers last year. Crime overall is 56% lower than it was in 2010, and crime is continuing to fall. There is, of course, more work to do, but we're here to fund the police, we're here to back the police, and we're here to keep our constituents safe, and that is what this financial settlement does.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order paper, Shadow Minister Alex Norris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I start with our thanks to police officers, police community support officers and police staff across the country for their work. It can be dangerous work, it is always important work. Our communities value it greatly and it is essential to British life. We are grateful and lucky to have them. I thank two police and crime commissioners. They are 85 days away from the next set of PCC elections. Some will not be standing again, some may not be returned, some will be re-elected. And again, our thanks go to all of them for what is a very difficult job across often huge geographies to represent and step up for their communities. And we again are very lucky to have them. And we reach this debate with police forces across England and Wales still living with the impact of 14 years of failure by this government. Rates of serious violence up, charge rates plummeting. I'm amazed what the Minister said about morale amongst the rank and file officers. We know that that is at low levels. We know that the loss of staff is significant in the last year, and it is very strange to hear that that is not a problem. And we know that Chief Constables and Police and Crime Commissioners are grappling with limited resources and trying to deal with a crisis in public confidence that is disconnected, frankly, from what the Minister just said. And all the while, the real and everyday problems that our constituents see in their communities are getting worse, not better. We've witnessed a collapse in neighbourhood policing in recent years with 10,000 fewer officers on the beat, and police forces are still reeling from years of experience and expertise that was lost when the government cut police officers by 20,000. And the new recruits brought in when the government realised the grave error they've made, well, an estimated 6,000 of those officers are not on frontline duty, but are instead covering roles traditionally done by vital civilian staff. Is it any wonder that 50% of people say they no longer ever see the police on the streets? And I put this to honourable colleagues. Which case better marries up with what their constituents say, what the Minister just said and what I've just said there? I know the answer from... I will give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend who's making an excellent case, but in particular with regards to neighbourhood policing, he is absolutely right. During the last decade, due to austerity, we've seen substantial cuts. In West Yorkshire, we've lost 1,000 neighbourhood police officers. Would he agree with me that neighbourhood policing is the essential link between the police and our communities? Not only does it increase confidence in policing, but makes the role much easier in terms of preventative antisocial behaviour and many other areas because of the bond between the community and the police.
My honourable friend makes a very important point, and I absolutely share that. Neighbourhood policing is the very bedrock of policing, and a lot of the problems that we're now trying to deal with that have grown and festered, which I'm about to speak on in a second, are because we gave up on neighbourhood policing and have given up for well over a decade and have lost control of our streets. So whether that's antisocial behaviour, whether that's shoplifting on high streets, whether that's epidemic level of violence and abuse against our retail workers, communities where there's drug dealing in broad daylight, horrific levels of knife crime, up 77% since 2015. Our experience of our constituents under this government is criminals get let off and victims get let down. And that means that after 14 years in government, the Minister didn't use this in his statistical rundown. Over 90% of crimes now go unsolved, meaning that criminals are less than half as likely to be caught as they were when this government took office in 2010. That is the government's record on law and order, and the government may want, and the Minister wants us to believe, that we've never had it so good. But everywhere we look, there are serious problems that are compounded to a degree by this settlement. Now, of course, this is an unamendable motion about more money for our policing. Of course, we will support that. But the detail that sits beneath it deserves serious scrutiny. Colleagues will have seen the dismay across policing at the 6% cash increase, an increase set below the level of the pay award, and that's before on cost, before on top inflation, and this settlement exacerbates rather than resolves some of those funding challenges. Particularly challenging, then the Minister said this himself, that a third of this settlement is based on the assumptions that police and crime commissioners will increase council tax for local ratepayers to the maximum. So yet again, we see the shift from central government funding to local communities for vital everyday services. And the government have lifted, as the Minister said, the cap on precepts so that the PCCs can raise it by £13 next year for bandy properties. And that in itself is a challenge for people and their finances, but also has differential challenges across the country as that money is not then spread equitably. So the most deprived areas of our country that have the fewest bandy or the higher banded properties that pay higher rates of council tax get the least return from a local precept. So better off areas will get more funding because their tax base is higher. That's not levelling up, Madam Deputy Speaker. I suspect levelling up's long since been put in a drawer somewhere, but it is driving a wedge between different parts of our country when the safety and security of our constituents is at stake. And that means, this failure of leadership means, that less well-off areas, parts of the country more likely to suffer from antisocial behaviour or from violence or sexual offences or robbery. I'll give way, of course.
Thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. He said a moment ago that this was shifting the balance of funding onto local areas. Just to be absolutely clear about the facts, the increase in central government grant going to police and crime commissioners is just over £600 million. The anticipated increase in relation to the precept is about £300 million. So the government grant increase is about double the precept increase. So the central government finance line is bearing by far the lion's share of the increase, about two-thirds of it, in fact.
I'm grateful for that intervention. I don't think it's revelatory. Indeed, I think we'll have decades, if not century and a half's worth of precedent that central government funds policing in this country. What I'm saying is that we've seen year on year, and this is a continuation of this, of an increasing, the share provided by the local rates payer is increasing. I think it is legitimate to ask whether that is the best funding model, and I'll get to the funding formula shortly. But as I say, this differential impact is not a serious way to bring down crime rates across the country. And to add insult to this injury, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister says in his written statement, I quote, "When setting their budgets, PCC should be mindful of the cost of living pressures that householders are facing." I mean, are they for real, Madam Deputy Speaker? Given the Minister's role in the previous government, that is front beyond imagination. Given the government's indifference to the challenges that people across the UK face, that is front beyond imagination. To say to our PCCs they should be mindful, well, I say, physician, heal thyself. Mr. Speaker, the public, though, they won't be taken for fools by the government. Just as when they open their mortgage statements, they know what has happened. When they open their council tax bill, it will tell them all they need to know. Turning now to the funding formula, which other colleagues have raised, Countless ministers over the years have stood at that dispatch box or answered written questions, including the Minister himself, pledging to do something about a system that is badly overdue for renewal. Members from across the House have been raising this for many years with the government. In December, the Treasury informed the Public Accounts Committee that a new funding formula would be introduced as soon as possible. Then in January, the Minister, the Right Honourable Gentleman, said in response to a question by my honourable friend, the member for Mid-Bedfordshire, that he would update the House as soon as I can on work to update the formula. But yet, 2 weeks ago, we see in the press that the can is to be kicked down the road again because Number 10 are worried about police funding cuts in the general election year. I will give way, yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I'd like to start too by quickly thanking the fantastic work undertaken by local police officers right across Bedfordshire. But with the Conservatives' own Police and Crime Commissioner agreeing that the current unfair funding formula leaves completely no meat on the bone for local police, would my honourable friend agree that it's current police officers and local residents who are being let down by the inaction on this, and that ministers owe it to them to live up to their previous commitment to ensure a fair formula is delivered within this Parliament?
Very grateful for that contribution, my honourable friend. Yes, I think that is what the public would expect. They'd expect that formulas reflect the need across the country, but also that when promises are made repeatedly over multiple years, that those promises might be kept, even if the upshot of those are difficult political questions. I think the government ought to raise above that, and instead it just looks like they're trying to dodge responsibility. So I hope the Minister could perhaps in his summing up be clear about the status. Has Number 10 Downing Street told him to put it on hold? And if not, when is it going to be announced? The public deserve to know. Yes, we'll give way.
I'm extremely grateful to him for giving way, and I congratulate him on his comments. Could I ask him kindly to take a look at the recommendations of the Welsh Government's own independent commission on the constitutional future of Wales, which reported earlier this month? And they strongly argued in favour of devolving policing and criminal justice powers to Wales, and that's a position that's supported by the Welsh Government and the current First Minister. And in terms of funding, that would have a huge difference on funding for policing in Wales, because that then funding would be based on population share and bar net consequentials of spending in England as opposed to the funding formula at present.
I'm grateful for that intervention. I have had conversations with my colleagues in Wales on that matter. I mean, there is something about the funding formula and Barnet, not perhaps conflating them, but I think it shows how badly broken the formula is. I think that point is well made, and I've had those conversations with colleagues in Wales, as I say. Turning now to some of the Minister's priorities as outlined in his statement. The police uplift programme, and as I said earlier, 6,000 of these new recruits aren't actually where the public would expect them to be. And I've had a front row seat over my few months in post, Madam Deputy Speaker, watching the government go through all the contortions on this issue. Last autumn, they told us we had record police on the neighbourhood beat. Well, that's long since been disproven. So earlier this year, the Minister tried a new tack, and the Minister said that they were going to rebadge response police as neighbourhood police so that they could add those numbers together and that those numbers, therefore, would match up with the rhetoric. Well, of course, the public have seen right through that as well. So last week, the Home Secretary tried another approach, and that's demanding that police chiefs put more officers on the beat as part of his Back to Basics campaign, as if those chiefs aren't working overdrive to do that all the time, all year round, and we respect and recognise their huge amount of work they're doing to get police out where communities want them. That is another approach by the government and another one that will fail. I mean, I was in short trousers the last time they did a Back to Basics campaign, but I don't think it's got a very good history. I'm not sure it's the right approach for them. But what we see, as always, denial, deflection, always someone else's fault. But we have a better plan, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our community policing guarantee would rebuild neighbourhood policing and put 13,000 police and police community support officers back on the beat, embedded in our communities, not counting crimes but problem solving and working with local communities to tackle and deter crime. This would be funded through a police efficiency and collaboration programme, saving £360 million through centralised standard setting for procurement and increased collaboration on shared services and specialist functions. And the Minister says in his statement that he wants to reduce inefficiencies. So that's a 2-for-1 for him. More efficiency, more officers on the front line. Why aren't we seeing those plans from the government today? So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister expects garlands from colleagues this afternoon. He won't get them from us. He tells the British people repeatedly that they've never had it so good on crime and policing. That rhetoric doesn't match reality, it doesn't match the public experience. And as a result, this settlement is in line with those that have preceded it for more than a decade. It won't deliver. They are wrong and the public know it. But I know that sometimes the public loses hope. I know that sometimes people in the policing family lose hope. But all I say is that if we all pull together, we can make sure this is the last police grant settlement that this government does. Thank you.
Steve Dobbin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm delighted to just make a contribution to this debate. In the interest of transparency, I just make the House aware that an immediate member of my family is a serving police officer with Devon and Cornwall Police, and very proud of them we are. And also start by saying, put on record my huge thanks and appreciation to all of the police officers across Devon and Cornwall, and particularly those who work out of St Austell and Newquay police stations. And I have seen firsthand their dedication, and they have helped me a number of times when I've needed their help, and they do an incredible job, and I'm very grateful to them. I very much welcome the uplift in funding that's being made available to police across the country in England and Wales today. I'm particularly grateful that the increase in funding made available for Devon and Cornwall Police actually is being increased by 7.1%, which is actually higher than the national average, and does go some way to closing the historic funding gap that we've had for our police. We are using that money incredibly well in Devon and Cornwall, particularly in recruiting more police officers. The number of police officers in Devon and Cornwall Police is now at an all-time record at 3,610, which is an uplift of 470 above the previous 2019 figure. And in fact, I've been made aware that we've done so well in recruitment, as opposed to some other parts of the country, that more funding has been made available to Devon and Cornwall to enable us to now recruit an additional 71 officers. So the number is only going to go higher, which is hugely welcome. And I want to pay tribute to the hard work of our Police and Crime Commissioner, Alison Hernandez, for the leadership and work that she has put in to really get us into this very good and healthy place in terms of police numbers in Devon and Cornwall. However, I just want to, one point I want to make is one of the things that continually concerns me whenever I go out on patrol and observe the police on the front line is just the amount of time that they spend actually dealing with issues that are not actually policing matters. Yes. And they have to pick up the slack far too often for other parts of the public sector who aren't stepping up and fulfilling their role, whether that be in supporting mental health or other parts of the NHS or indeed social services. And I would just say to the Minister, one thing I think he could do to really support our frontline police officers across the country is work with other parts of the public sector, other government departments, to make sure that they are doing everything they can to fulfil their duties and not just have the default position of falling back on, well, the police will pick up the slack every time, because that is one of the things that I know is putting huge pressure on frontline policing and taking them away from doing the job that the public actually want and expect them to be doing to keeping us safe. In terms of Devon and Cornwall, the Devon and Cornwall Police Force actually polices the largest force area in terms of landmass of any other in England. We also have the longest coast of any police force in England, and we also have the longest road network at 13,000 miles of any police force in England. So for all those reasons, Devon and Cornwall Police have a hugely challenging job policing one of the most rural parts, two of the most rural counties in the country. Just particularly highlighting Cornwall, the fact that over 40% of people in Cornwall live in communities of less than 3,000 people, and we have no towns of over 25,000 population, demonstrates just how rural and sparsely populated our force area is, and the impact that that has on the police being able to deliver the service that we expect of them. And then there's the additional impact that tourism has on Devon and Cornwall, where our average population in the tourist season actually increases by 7%, but that is concentrated in a small, relatively small number of areas. And for instance, towns like Newquay see their population in the peak tourism go up by 6 or 7 times the resident population. And this inevitably means that the number of incidents that the police are expected to respond to goes up significantly. I will happily give way.
Thank you. And the situation in Devon and Cornwall is very similar to East Sussex. Camber Sands has an influx of people. 25,000 people can be on the beach. And obviously police resourcing is very difficult. So I think when it comes to police funding, would my honourable friend agree that we need to look at the geography of the area covered and the specific and absolute need, not the relative need?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and she makes the point that I was precisely going to go on to make. That in my case, particularly in regard to Devon and Cornwall, the unique challenges that we face, both because of our geography and because of the number of tourists that we welcome every year, means that there is a very unique challenge on our police force to deliver the service that we require of them. And in addition to that, for Cornwall, a point that I will continually make is that being a narrow peninsula and only having one neighbour on the mainland means that we have to build in our own resilience, that we cannot rely on other areas to turn up quickly to help us out. And this is something that really does need to be reflected in the funding formula. Now, I am greatly encouraged that this has been recognised by this government, and they have committed to review the funding formula and take into consideration things like geography, sparsity, rurality, and indeed the impact of tourism. And I would just urge the Minister to do all he can to actually get this review carried out and in place and brought in to adjust the funding. And can I just say, we're certainly not going to take any lessons from Labour in rural areas when it comes to funding police, because it was actually under the last Labour government that rural areas were virtually abandoned in terms of the funding formula, and all the money was put into to urban areas, and all the formula was tweaked to go towards density, when in fact actually delivering services in rural areas costs far more than it does in densely populated areas. So we're going to take no lessons from Labour on this, but I would just urge the Minister to do all he can to make sure that this funding review for police is carried out and implemented as quickly as possible, so that we really can see the funding gap that we have had to deal with for so long narrowed, and rural areas like Devon and Cornwall get the funding for their police that they rightly deserve.
Order. Just before I call the next member to speak, the House will have noted that the order paper notes that the police grant report and the local government finance instruments have not yet been considered by the Select Committee on Statutory Instruments. I've now been informed that the committee met a short time ago, and it has considered these instruments and has not drawn them to the attention of the House. To interpret what I've just said, for the sake of anyone listening, that means we can proceed as normal, and that we don't have to take any further steps that we weren't already planning to take. So I call Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and most grateful to you for that clarification. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, the Minister, for setting out the government's proposals for the police funding settlement for 2024-2025. Suffolk is due to receive an increase in core funding of 6.7% and hotspot response finance of £1 million. These settlements are welcome, but there are 3 issues that I would briefly like to raise, and certainly 2 of them have already been addressed in some detail. And the first of those is the funding review. Suffolk at present receives the fourth lowest funded force in the UK, and as such we are looking for the long-promised funding review to be carried out as soon as possible. Many of the challenges that we face are very similar to what we hear is happening in Cornwall as well. Now, on the 27th of November, at Home Office Questions, I asked my right honourable friend for an update on the progress of the review, and he responded by stating that he completely accepted the need for a new police funding formula, that his team had been working on it extremely hard with colleagues across government, and he hoped to have something to say on the topic very shortly. And it is in this context, as we've heard this afternoon, I would be most grateful for a further update on the progress of the review as to when we can expect to see the draft proposals for the new formula. There is a worry, as we've heard, that the review is being kicked into the long grass, and I do hope that my right honourable friend can allay this concern in his summing up. The second point I'll come on to, Madam Deputy Speaker, is for a police and crime commissioner, such as Tim Passmore, the PCC in Suffolk, budgeting presents considerable challenges, and he and other PCCs, I believe, are entitled to expect consistency in the commitments that are provided by government. And in this respect, the changes in funding for the Safer Streets initiative are disappointing. Initially, the Home Office offered Suffolk £1.4 million. This was then reduced by £400,000, and they are now taking away a further £180,000. Madam Deputy Speaker, this approach is, I would suggest, unfair and penalises smaller forces such as Suffolk, who, through no fault of their own, now face a funding gap without any explanation nor justification being given. I would therefore ask my right honourable friend to review this decision, which affects not just Suffolk, but forces all around the country. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, as we've heard, it's not just about money. A policeman's lot can be made considerably easier and hopefully happier if red tape is reduced. In this regard, I applaud the work of Ben Hudson, who is the Secretary and Treasurer of the Suffolk Police Federation, ably supported by my honourable friend, the member for Loughborough, to their campaign to amend the Data Protection Act so as to mitigate the impact of the bureaucratic burden of evidence redaction which is imposed on police officers when seeking charging decisions from the Crown Prosecution Service. A further amendment to the Data Protection and Data Information Bill is being tabled in the other place by the noble Baroness Morgan, and I would really urge the government to look at this issue very, very closely and do all they can to accept it. It will, in doing so, free up thousands of policing hours every year, as pre-charge redactions would not be required, and it would enable chief constables to better utilise allocated budgets, which, as we are hearing today, are restricted and is not quite as bountiful as we would all hope for. Madam Deputy Speaker, in summing up, what I would just say is we need that long overdue funding review, and I hope my honourable friend can allay the concerns that I've expressed. We need funding commitments that are, when they're given, that they are adhered to and are kept. And finally, as I've said, please, please, less red tape. Thank you.
Minister Laura Farris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is a pleasure to wind up this short but perfectly formed debate on police funding, and I'm grateful to the members who have spoken in it. Before I respond to the points that have been raised, I want to offer my own personal word of thanks and appreciation for the police officers, all the staff and the volunteers who do work tirelessly to keep us safe and run towards danger when everybody else is leaving the scene. We are fortunate to have them on our side. I don't propose to repeat the headline parts of the settlement that we are debating today, but I will simply say that our investment of £11.4 billion is significant, a significant commitment to policing, and it goes to the heart of our three priorities for the police. Personnel. We have delivered ahead of time on our commitment to recruit 20,000 police officers in this Parliament, and the funding today will continue to support and properly resource the 149,000 police officers who are employed in England and Wales. It will also allow us to give them a 7% pay rise on average that is consistent with the recommendation of the Police Remuneration Review Board. The second priority is, of course, public protection. And whether the shadow ministers like it or not, we are proud of the progress that we've made since 2010, according to the Crime Survey for England and Wales. And let me just say very gently, I know they don't like that survey, but the Office for National Statistics, which the public are entitled to rely upon, has described it as the best estimate for long-term trends in crime against household populations. They cannot get away from the fact that that survey says that overall crime levels have halved, more than halved, since 2010. If you take any form of offensive weapon, all offensive weapons, that's come down by more than 52%. If you take thefts, including domestic burglary, that has halved. In fact, domestic burglary today is at the lowest level on record. And I noted, I was listening carefully to the Shadow Minister, and I say this with respect, I noticed that he gave 3 examples of where he asserted the government had failed, but 2 of them concerned the retail environment. Now, I accept there's been an issue with retail theft, but he had to give 2 examples that were focused on retail crime because he didn't want to get into domestic burglary, because it's fallen so, of course it's serious, but it's fallen so much. My honourable friend, the member for Croydon South, quite properly talked about homicide, the maximum high harm offence. That's fallen since 2010, but we're making progress every year. Homicide rates have fallen by 10% in the last 12 months alone. And then our third priority relates to performance, and we make no apology on this side of the House for seeking to drive improvement and efficiencies. One such efficiency was the partnership between the police and the blue light commercial exercise that has already saved over £170 million. But we're continuing to drive through efficiencies through technological advancements on things like detection. My honourable friend, the member for Croydon South, gave the example, which has been so successful in his own constituency, of facial recognition technology, imagery, better intelligence, improving also actually the performance of police officers themselves through the deployment of specialist trained officers for the most sensitive crimes like rape. He will know that there are more than 2,000 specialist trained officers who will be deployed across all 43 forces in England and Wales by April of this year. Turning now to some of the points that were made by honourable members, starting with my honourable friend, the member for St Austell and Newquay, who made a number of points. First of all, it is good to have seen numbers rising in his constituency. He's correct. We are now north of 3,650 in Devon and Cornwall. He's also quite right to mention the fact that so much police time has historically been subsumed by dealing with mental health problems. And I want to provide him with some reassurance. There is now a national rollout of a scheme called Right Care, Right Person. It is effectively a toolkit that was piloted in 2021 very successfully by the Humberside Police. And it means that police won't ordinarily attend a mental health incident. There is an exception for that, actually, when there is a possibility of a referral under Section 3 of the Mental Health Act. But other than that, they won't be involved. And it is estimated that on a nationwide basis, that could save 1 million hours of police officer time in any year. So I hope that provides some reassurance. He made some very valid points, actually, about geography and about the special requirements of policing in rural areas, and how this is something that Labour have never fully or adequately dealt with. And I suppose the reason for that, I say this very respectfully, is that very few Labour MPs represent rural areas, and there is a consistent ignorance of the kinds of crimes that are specific to rural environments. Addressing now the very good speech by my honourable friend, the member for Waveney, my honourable friend, the member for Waveney, who acknowledged there was a percentage increase that had come to the Suffolk Police. I listened carefully to what he said about the Safer Streets programme and the £500,000 reduction. And I just gently point out to him, although I was listening very carefully to what he said, that overall the Suffolk Police are getting an increase of 11 million in their budget, and that overall that is a small number of officers overall. But I will promise to take that back for him and get back to him on that point. So, to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, we couldn't be clearer. Public protection is our priority. We have delivered on it, and we will always stand on the side of the law-abiding majority and support the police. We will take the fight to the criminals again and again, even as their nefarious practices evolve. This government will always ensure that police have the resources, powers and capability to do their crucial work, and this settlement underlines our enduring commitment to strong and effective policing in England and Wales, and I commend it to the House.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order papers, is that opinion say aye? Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. And so we proceed to the three motions on local government finance, which will be debated together. I pause momentarily to allow the correct ministers and shadow ministers to go into place. And now they are there. I call